how do you overcome moments of fear
Yeah,
as
let's
a
jump to
business
that.
owner?
That's fine.
And, and I think that, it's very much connected with how people make choices around how they spend their time. Because I think on one level, we all just get genuinely busy. It's easy to get distracted. It can be difficult to choose your priorities when so many things seem equally important. And so, there's that bucket that chaos pours into. But I think the other bucket sometimes is fear, because business owners are very hard on themselves. Um, I think it does take an above average person to start a business. You have to have a certain tolerance for risk. You have to be really resourceful. You have to be willing to step into a leadership role and make difficult decisions. And that tends to naturally come with somewhat high standards, high expectations for conduct, for achievement, and whatnot. And so when we make the time to try to do something and it doesn't pan out as it does in our imagination, I think that there's a certain amount of fear or shame around that. And what I'd like to really encourage all business owners to do is to treat their business as if they're a scientist and their business is an experiment, right?
Okay.
Scientists are not ever permanently married to one way of being. They are constantly coming up with a theory, testing the theory, looking at what the evidence is telling them. And if what it's telling them is you're on the right track, then they continue down that track. But if the evidence tells them this isn't working out, they don't have fear or shame around that. They just accept the data for what it's telling them and change course. And as much as it's an emotional experience to be a business owner and to create something from scratch, and I would never imagine separating someone from that experience. I think we need to layer with that a more kind of experimental approach where there is no such thing as bad data. The only
Right.
bad thing is to not try or to ignore what the evidence is telling you. And I see that relate back very much to, again, people's choice to work in rather than on their business. Sometimes they're working in it not just out of necessity, but out of fear of change.
Yeah, I think, that those moments of fear, I think you're right. And, I know Sal and I have experienced, we say with all the topics we cover, one, we bring up the topics because we think they're relevant. Also, by the same token, we've experienced all these as small business owners ourselves, right? And it's a
Right.
it's a dynamic and situation and kind of a constant thing, that those moments of fear where, um, like you said, you conceived of it one way in your head and how it was all going to play out, and then the data and evidence tells you something to the contrary. Um, and you're right. I mean, I felt it, where you feel a little bit paralyzed by that fear in that moment, but then you just have
Mm-hmm.
to. I think the way you put it is perfect. You've got to look at it and say, "Hey, I'm taking a scientific approach. I formulated a hypothesis. I put some steps into action. I've collected some data, and here's what it's telling me." And then, at that moment, you can either be paralyzed by that fear, which I don't know, at least for me, it's still going to happen. It's just how long it
Sure.
lasts.
Sure.
Um,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
so it's going to happen. But then, in terms of it not lasting that long, I think you're right, Stephanie. It's about, okay, well, what is the data telling me?
Right.
And what is that, tweak to the business model, as Sal mentioned earlier, or pivot point that I look to next? And how do I use this data in an advantageous way,
Mm-hmm.
and move forward? Because I think that's what a lot of the small business owners want to do. I mean, you're right. It takes a special
Yeah.
person, so they kind of have that
Right.
dogged determination. So if they follow the data, they're probably just going to use it, to propel themselves forward. I don't
Right.
think I think the type of the makeup of the entrepreneur or business owner is such that they want to keep, they want to keep pushing on, or trudging forward. It's just, to your point, are they using the data in a good way to do that,
Yes.
instead of being paralyzed by that fear if things don't pan
Correct.
out the way
Yeah.
they
No,
thought they would?
I agree. Stephanie, I think, you bring up a very good point about, fear, and it is scary, right? It's scary to be in your own business. It's scary to be, if you're somewhat on your own, solopreneur. And I think that does happen where, because it is scary, because there is a fear factor, they end up falling back on just working in the business because that's
Yes.
easier, right? It's
Yes.
easier for me to just kind of work in the business and not really kind of think about all those other elements because they're scary. And so I think it's good advice to let them know that, hey, this is a reality of owning a business, and because of that, here's an approach like you mentioned. I think if you can game plan it, or think of it, as a scientist and an experimentation, and you're constantly making changes, and you have to carve out the right amount of time to do that analysis, and kind of sit back and say, okay, what went right, what went wrong, what can I change, what do I need to adjust, and I think ultimately that will take the fear or the scariness, out of, the equation. I think if you treat it like you mentioned, I think that's great advice. Treat it like a scientist. It's an experiment, and you're moving forward with all of your data, right or wrong, good or bad. You're continuing to move
Yes.
forward.